Little Miss Chatterbox talked more than a lot. She talked all of the time. Day in and day out, week after week, month after month, year in and year out. She never stopped. She didn't know it, but she even talked during her sleep. She had a brother. I bet you can guess what his name was. Can't you? That's right, Mr. Chatterbox. She looks a bit like him, don't you think? There's little pictures, look. They do look similar. You should have heard them when they got together. You couldn't get a word in edgeways, or sideways, or anyways. Have you ever heard about someone being able to talk the hind leg of a donkey? Well, Mr. Chatterbox could talk both hind legs of a donkey, and his sister could talk the hind leg of an elephant. Now, this story is about the time Little Miss Chatterbox decided to get herself a job, which she did in a bank in Happyland. I like that, Happyland. At 10 o'clock on Monday morning, Mr. Happy strolled into the Happy to Lend You bank in the middle of Happy Town. He took out his checkbook, wrote a check, and went to the counter. Behind the counter, on the first morning sat at work, stood Little Miss Chatterbox. She smiled at Mr. Happy. Mr. Happy smiled back. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Well," said Little Miss Chatterbox, taking a deep breath. Deep breath, everybody. Here we go. There's a long bit coming up. "For the time of year, it is a good morning, but not quite as good as the morning we had yesterday, and I dare say tomorrow morning will be an even better morning, but it's quite good a morning for Monday morning, and..." She went on and on and on until it was time for the bank to shut. Mr. Happy was still standing there with his mouth open in amazement. He'd been there for hours. Sounds a bit like me, to be honest. "And now," continued Little Miss Chatterbox, "it's time for the bank to shut and time for me to get home. So goodbye and nice talking to you." And she went home, leaving poor Mr. Happy without any money. The following morning, she was fired. Oh no! She got herself another job in a restaurant, the Eat-A-Lot. It was Tuesday morning, and at midday, Mr. Greedy walked into the restaurant and sat himself down at his usual corner table. He always ate there on Tuesdays because that was the day when they served extra large portions. The waitress came up to take his order. "What's the soup of the day?" Mr. Greedy asked the waitress. "Well," said Little Miss Chatterbox, for she was the waitress, "the soup of the day is tomato, but we also have other soups on the menu, such as oxtail and vegetable and chicken and noodles, where we also have lots of other things to start, such as..." And she went on and on and on until midnight. Mr. Greedy was still sitting there, listening in amazement. He'd been there for 12 hours, just listening. "And now," continued Little Miss Chatterbox, "it's time for the Eat-A-Lot restaurant to shut, and therefore time for me to go home, so goodbye and nice talking to you." And she went home, leaving poor Mr. Greedy feeling rather empty. The next morning, she was fired. Not again. The same thing happened all week long. On Thursday morning, she was fired from her job as an assistant at a hat shop. Miss Splendid went into the shop to buy herself a new hat, but she couldn't. "Oh, madam, I've just a hat for you, and now you're going to love it, because it's pink, and pink's your favourite colour, and it was all talk, and no hat." On Friday morning, she was fired from her job as a secretary with Mr. Uppity. Mr. Uppity incredibly was the richest man in the world. Sorry, my brain went a bit funny there. Was the richest man in the world. I just thought you'd like to know. But poor Mr. Uppity didn't make any money that day. That Little Miss Chatterbox was working for him. Oh no. Mr. Uppity, I've never worked in an office before, and it's exciting, and you would like a cup of coffee, as you are the richest, and everyone says that you are, and it was all talk and no work. But this story was a happy ending, because at the very end of the week, little Miss Chatterbox managed to find herself a job that suited her down to the ground and up in the sky. That Saturday evening, Mr. Chatterbox was at home in Chatterbox Cottage, which is where they lived. Mr. Chatterbox was cross because his watch had stopped, and he'd arranged to meet little Miss Sunshine at 7 o'clock, and he had no idea what time it was. So he decided to telephone the speaking clock to find out what time it was. He dialed the number, and at the third stroke it will be 6:25 and 15 seconds. Little Miss Chatterbox took a deep breath. Pip, pip, pip. At the third stroke, it was 6:25 and 20 seconds. Pip, pip, pip. That's so funny, thought Mr. Chatterbox to himself. That sounds just like my sister.